Yeah, a lot of fleets, they want to be able to see, okay, I'm 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 paying this much per mile for trucks, and I do indeed have, or for repair and maintenance, and my crashes are indeed lower. That justifies that cost. That means that whoever's in charge of repair and maintenance can go back and say, hey, look, we actually had a benefit. We're paying a little bit more than the industry average, but look at what it's actually, doing on the other side. Or on the other hand,
Trucking is difficult. It's an essential industry that every corner of the nation depends on, even without knowing it. To the average consumer, the supply chain is magic, and sometimes a black hole. Products on store shelves, dinner on restaurant tables, packages on doorsteps. It's expected to be there on time, every time, and only recognized if there's a service failure. But how is a sausage made? Who's talking about the issues that matter to trucking companies?
Welcome to TrueNorth Truck Thought, or the TTT Pod for short, a monthly podcast hosted by Scopelitas Transportation Consulting and brought to you by TrueNorth Companies. We're here to demystify the magic, address the black holes, and to talk trucking to the industry we love. Whether it's the latest research, upcoming laws and rules, safety issues and solutions, or practical discussions about real-life supply chain challenges, the TTT Pod is here to help the most important industry in our country to navigate its greatest challenges and opportunities. We bring together some of the best and brightest experts to talk about and tackle some of the most pressing industry issues. So without further ado, I'm Steve Kepler.
And I'm Sean Garney. Let's get trucking. We all know how competitive the trucking industry is. Some of this is a byproduct of the size and the number of players vying for an often unpredictable freight market. FMCSA puts the number of active interstate for-hire motor carriers at around 487,000. These motor carriers use 2.9 million vehicles and 3.2 million drivers. That's a lot of competition. Of course, to remain competitive, motor carriers need to understand how they're performing relative to their peers and others in the industry. Unfortunately, good benchmarking data can be difficult to come by. The good news is, though, that the American Transportation Research Institute has this covered. Since 2008, they've been producing the Operational Costs of Trucking report. It contains reams of helpful data and is the topic of today's podcast. Joining us from TrueNorth today is Drew Mills, Principal and VP of Operations at TrueNorth Company and also a RAC member at ATRI. Also with us, Alex Leslie, Senior Research Associate with ATRI and primary author of this awesome report. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on today's podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure.
You bet. Why don't we start with Drew? Drew, just give us a little bit of your background here so we understand who we're talking to, and then we'll move on to Alex.
Yeah. So I can go way back to when I was 14 years old. I worked part-time for my dad, who was a truck mechanic, diesel mechanic, and got to experience the trucking industry from that side. Ultimately led to joining TrueNorth about 10 years ago. Started in the finance department, so I lead with an analytical mindset, which very much ties into this report, which is very much a passion of mine, and ultimately joined the REC, as you mentioned, 2 years ago, and really just about that purpose is taking analytics and how do we support the motor trucking industry, and a unique thing we do at TrueNorth around helping our clients manage total cost of risk. And to me, this study really ties in with that on its counter side of how do you manage operations within your business. And so often the collaboration of the two is how we help service our clients manage both sides of their business. And so a unique one for me to be involved in. Again, been with TrueNorth for 10 years, and I lead up operations for our Risk and Workforce Solutions division, which is our value add outside of the placement of insurance. And we engage in supporting our clients in unique things like safety and loss control support, claims, and technology analytics. So happy to be here, and thanks for having us.
Wowza. Bringing a lot to the table here, coming from way back. Appreciate that. Alex, what do you think? What's your background?
Well, I have some extended family members in the trucking industry, so always kind of aware of the complexity and size of the industry, which, you read out those numbers, but a lot of folks outside don't realize just how much happens. My own background, though, is a bit more on the research side of things. So I have a PhD in English and data science, and so that research background is actually what brought me into the industry.
English and data science together comes to the trucking industry. How fascinating.
Well, you know what though? It's perfect because someone needs to explain the ones and zeros to everybody.
Amen, brother.
Well, great. Well, thank you all. Both you guys for joining us. I think Drew, you talk about operations and risk and safety. It's interesting. Sean and I talk, and I'm sure you do every day with motor carriers about this constant, tension, if you will, between operations and safety. And it's always a challenge depending on the fleet, but it's really important that to have a really good, successful fleet, you've got to have perspective on both and be cognizant of both. And I think you bring a great skill set there to help with this. So maybe if you don't mind, Alex, starting off today, Sean mentioned this, you guys have been doing the study for a long time. It's one of the gold stars, if you will, in ATRI's arsenal, which have many. Maybe talk to us a little bit about the history of this report and why you guys do it every year.
Yeah, all of our research, we're the not-for-profit research arm of the trucking industry. So our research advisory committee, or RAC, that Drew has been a member of, they get together every year in the spring and they identify what our key research focus areas are going to be. And back in 2008, it would have, I guess, been the year before that, the RAC decided that we really need a public form of benchmarking that is going to be usable for the industry, for fleets, but also to help communicate conditions within the industry to partners outside of it, whether those be insurers or folks, shippers, customers, whoever. And so the first version of that report came out in 2008. It was a shorter. It was a little bit more focused at that time, but basically every year they kept saying, "Hey, you got to do this again," to the point where now we do it on an annual basis, and every year it expands a little bit, gets a little something new involved, and it really is one of our most sought after reports every year. So we're really excited to do it every year.
Yeah, I think one of the things you guys do a great job of is you keep, your core stuff you do really well, but every year you try and add something of value to it. I was actually on the RAC at that time when it was started. I was on the RAC for 7 years back, starting in 2007, and I remember getting that study started. Everyone was really excited about it, and it's really a great report. And so maybe run through a little bit, if you don't mind, kind of briefly the methodology and some of the demographics and maybe kind of what's changed over time. Just talk a little bit about that, if you wouldn't mind, for us.
Yeah. The data all comes from motor carriers. It's their actual operational, cost data. So they submit that data with us, and then we create sort of an overall industry number, which is weighted based on sector representation in the industry. But other than that, we dig into all of these detailed analytics. So, truckload, 100 to 250 trucks, and look at how costs change within sectors, within fleet sizes, all those details. And we've expanded it over the years, especially to include more operational metrics that go beyond costs. Costs is a big part of the picture, but you also want to know what you're paying for, right? What does your breakdowns, miles between breakdowns look like, given that your repair and maintenance costs are XYZ. So being able to put those data points on cost into conversation with those operational ones has been probably the biggest way that the report has expanded and grown over the last 15 years or so.
Steve talked about the RAC, and so we've got a former RAC member on the call, and we have a current RAC member, and I presume that both of you have continued to vote for this thing to be real. So, or to continue, I should say. So we heard from Steve. Drew, how did the vote go last year? or the year before? Is there ever any debate, or is this like just a must-have sort of report?
Yeah, fortunately, this is locked in. This is happening every year, right, Alex? So there's not even a vote on this topic. It's everything else we get to debate, the 5 or so that we're going to focus on. But I think the industry has found so much value in this report every year that they have made this one that will continue for the time being going forward.
Awesome. So this, Alex, this is based mostly on survey data, right? So I'd be interested to talk just a little bit about that data. So can you talked about adding data elements every year. What's happened to the survey population over time? If you can talk a little bit about that. And I also know that you must validate or bounce this off some other data sources, government data sources, that sort of thing. So can you just talk about sort of how all that comes together and how the volume of data has increased over time?
Yeah. So, I mean, the demand for this continues increasing. So certainly in the years that I've been working on it, we've seen participants increase substantially, frankly, each year. And this is across fleets of all sizes. So we've got owner operators that submit data all the way up to, thousands of truck fleets. Fleets, they submit this data often. It's, we call it data collection rather than a survey, because really it does go, motor carriers, they take their time. We have this window of time of about 2 months open. And during that time, I am fielding questions. Once data is submitted, we go through very carefully and we look at, all of those data points to make sure that they're falling within expected ranges, that they look consistent for what we've seen historically. We also cross-validate with a number of other sources. It's in a lot of these cost areas, there is some other data point out there, but just by itself, there's the, you can get the producer price index for tire costs. Now, the fact that falls from 186 to 185, it's hard for that to be actionable. But when we can say, oh, that does actually fall in line with what we see on the actual cost, then that's the kind of tool that we can help use to validate and strengthen our numbers and make them more directly applicable.
And I think it's maybe a good plug about those that participate get to see their own benchmarking statistics against their like peers. I think, again, breaking it down by demographics, that's where it becomes so valuable. We talked about some of the benchmarking that we do too, and it's just, the amount of data that your very small but mighty team is able to collect and digest is impressive. So if you want to add anything else on top of that.
So carrier incentives, I wanted to talk about that. Drew, Alex, can you tell us what a carrier gets for participating?
They get the warmth in their heart that they're
yeah.
They do get that, but
they do get that. That comes for sure.
No, what we did a couple years ago, we added a customized report for all fleets that participate, because everyone it's not pay to play. You can get the full report, anyone right now, for free, truckingresearch.org. But we wanted to be able to add something, a little bit of extra for those participating fleets without sort of hiding it behind closed doors. So what we do is we produce this customized report that directly compares where they fall on the spectrum to their immediate peer group in the same sector in fleet size. And so that has been really valuable, I think, for a lot of the fleets, especially, fleets with 5,000 trucks. They've got teams of folks working in analytics. They're going to be able to take our report and do all kinds of stuff with that. But, fleets with 100 trucks, say, they don't have necessarily all that staff on hand doing that. So this incentive does help cover a lot of that.
Well, I think you're right. And, Sean and I work with a lot of fleets too, and we get asked all the time, what are these folks doing? What's everyone else doing? So I think this industry is very peer focused, and that benchmarking is hugely valuable, particularly when and you guys produce so much data in this report, probably more than most of your others, I would think. And so on that point, from a benchmarking perspective, what do you hear from the fleets on what are they really most interested in? Of all the stuff you guys are producing in this report, what are some of the key things that they really pay attention to?
Well, the bread and butter continues to be those core cost categories, right? Things like tire costs, driver wages, repair and maintenance per mile. That has always been the heart of this report, and it will always continue to be. But everything that we've added, it's not just me sitting in the room dreaming things up. I could certainly do that, but these are always data points that are requested by carriers. Carriers say, it would be helpful for me to know what out-of-pocket incident costs are on a per mile basis, in addition to premium costs per mile. So everything that's been added is based on requests, frankly, and then we try to speak to carriers that participate to say, hey, is this going to be something that you can do? We don't want to overwhelm. We still want owner-operators to be able to actually submit data and not just the big carriers. So a lot of fleets, they'll look at those core cost areas and then they'll try to compare them to, okay, if this was my insurance cost per mile and this was my out-of-pocket costs, how does that balance out? How do they compare each of them individually? But then when I combine them, how does that compare as well to the field? And so really being able to cross-reference across the report is something that we're seeing a lot of fleets increasingly do.
And Steve, you hit on it earlier, and there's a lot of great data in this report as it relates to profit margins, which we all know are, low single digits for the trucking industry. But how much do they have to invest back into safety, right? And so getting some of that data and then benchmarking themselves against their peers, they can see maybe where they are higher in cost from an operations perspective and try to manage to that more industry average or peer average so that they can put back more into the risk side of their business.
Yeah, a lot of fleets, they want to be able to see, okay, I'm paying this much per mile for trucks, and I do indeed have, or for repair and maintenance, and my crashes are indeed lower. That justifies that cost. That means that whoever's in charge of repair and maintenance can go back and say, hey, look, we actually had a benefit. We're paying a little bit more than the industry average, but look at what it's actually, doing on the other side. Or on the other hand, say, hey, look, profits are low everywhere. We also see a lot of fleets use this as a tool for thinking about how they interact in the marketplace with rates even. So if you've got a fleet out there saying, okay, my costs are this, my competitors' costs are this, that helps tell them what rates they can accept and actually make money on or break even on in a tough market like this. So having that bit of knowledge, it's good for comparing yourself to other fleets, knowing where you can improve or maybe where your spend is paying off. It's also good for knowing how to interact with customers and then getting that broad level industry-wide perspective too. How is the whole industry trending right now? And what do I need to be thinking about down the road as a result?
That's you make an interesting point there. I suspect that point you just made is probably of huge value to the smaller carriers because they don't often have the same sophistication as the larger fleets to do the type of analysis that you guys can do. And I'm sure it's a huge benefit for them on that whole rate point you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, we should start talking about the findings. We've talked about how valuable the findings is. Maybe now's our time to jump in and tell the good people what your report said. Before we do that, of course, I think we'll pause for a moment for a message from our sponsor, and then we'll be right back, talk to Alex and Drew and Steve a little bit more about what the report actually says.
Since 2001, we've been partnering with top-tier transportation firms, building custom solutions, delivering tangible results. Our mission remains steadfast, to help transportation companies like yours in protecting and maximizing assets, resources, and opportunities.
Whether you're a motor carrier, freight broker, owner-operator, or a final mile service provider, we're here to support your unique needs.
Reach out to our team of specialists to learn more about how we can tailor a comprehensive solution to meet the needs of your business.
So, Alex, I think what most people want to know, what are the most significant influencing factors on a carrier's costs, and is it consistent or does it change over time?
Yeah, it it changes all the time, and it's highly based on where you're operating, what sector, sometimes what part of the country. All of these factors have a pretty significant impact on how those costs look. Generally speaking, larger fleets have lower costs, but that's not always the case. A lot of smaller fleets actually have lower costs when it comes to labor, driver wages. They're able to pay a little less because they're able to offer other things in terms of of the workplace environment and the kind of company. But also, of course, when you're looking at different modes, flatbed versus truckload, just the priorities change a lot. The model of what is the commodity being hauled, all of these things end up impacting those costs at the end of the day. And it's funny. I always say that there's 1,001 ways to operate in this business, to record your costs, to go about doing trucking. And the trick is trying to get those all sort of focused into one report here.
So I want to back the truck up, so to speak, here, because I'm not like an economic person, right? And so here's the big number: $2.27 per mile, right? That's what your report says. That's my marginal cost. What does that mean? What cost me $2.27 a mile? And what do I do with that? And certainly everybody else on the call already understands this, but just walk me through it like, are you smarter than the fifth grader?
Sure. So the marginal costs are the costs that you're paying every mile that you're operating. And so every mile that you're running, you're incurring repair and maintenance costs. You're making a payment on that truck. Essentially, you can break it down to per mile. You're paying your driver a wage. You're paying for their benefits. You're paying for tires. Those are the core, in addition to a couple others: insurance premiums, tolls, any special licenses. Those are your core marginal costs. And they're really the centerpiece of what it takes to do business in the trucking industry. Other stuff all comes on top of that. You probably do need somebody working in the office. You maybe do need to pay some real estate, some lease costs, etc. All of that, though, happens on top of those really central core costs of actually just operating a truck day in, day out in the industry. And so that's what that $2.27 per mile is. And that's the most directly comparable to things like rates, for example.
Yeah. So then to make a profit, I've got to average all my lanes and all my runs, and it's got to be higher than that. Otherwise, I'm trucking like Steve. Just kidding, Steve. I don't know. Steve makes a profit, I bet.
Right. Yeah. So that's the number that you need on average for break even. Again, excluding some of those other costs that you have, we try to calculate those in a little bit too. But your office workers, your any terminal leases, that kind of thing. But right, it's those core costs that you need to know and get that average on. And those are really the areas where we see the majority, certainly, the majority of expenses in any fleet are going to fall into those categories.
What sticks out in this year's report as compared to last year or prior years to you all?
We saw costs go up this year, despite the fact that we're in a freight recession. And that, I think, is really the biggest takeaway here. We saw costs go up by 6.6% if you exclude fuel. Since fuel is usually accounted for by fuel surcharges, it's useful to pull that aside. So, it's a tough shift in terms of what we've been seeing. So coming out of the pandemic, of course, we had a really strong freight market, but we also had costs going up pretty substantially. It was all right because the rates were so high that we could sort of take those higher costs. But we saw costs go up by double-digit percentages for each of the last couple of years. This year, thankfully, we broke that trend, but not by as much as what a lot of us would have been hoping. Frankly, a lot of us would have been hoping that maybe costs stayed flat, or maybe, God forbid, they actually went down a little bit.
That's a dream.
But they did not, and they went up by, almost double the rate of inflation, which consumer inflation was about 3.4% in 2023. So that tells me that we have a lot of trucking specific pressures that are continuing to push on those costs, even though, again, we're in this freight recessionary moment.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a good point. One of the things I took from it, we hear a lot about driver wages and compensation, and to your point, Alex, even we're in this recession, driver pay continued to increase, now, albeit not as much as the last couple of years, but and if you look at the last 10 years, driver pay has gone up 70% in the last 10 years. And to me, I think that's a testament to the industry's commitment to take care of their drivers. And clearly the data is showing that.
Yeah. This year, driver wages went up by about 7.5%, which, again, we had double-digit increases for the past couple of years. So that's a still healthy gain. The job market continues to be strong in a lot of the country. We've seen headlines about job cuts in certain places, especially white-collar entry-level jobs, but in a lot of areas, it's still a pretty strong job market, and driver wages were going up by more than the national average. Now, I do think we are coming down off of those increases. One of the biggest things that that we noticed in the pandemic, economists across all industries, is that it's the professions with the greatest gains in income were generally those blue collar professions or somewhat lower paying positions. And they saw the biggest jump during the pandemic. And no wonder, because a lot of those individuals, whether that's in service or in trucking, were really on the front lines. And so this is something that they deserve, they absolutely needed. And, it helped correct for a period where driver wages, 10, 15 years ago were they were below where they probably should have been. So it's begun to pull back a bit, and I expect that percentage will be a bit lower even when we do this report next year. But it's still a healthy gain.
I found it interesting that it was and you mentioned this just previously, but that it was the largest carriers that were sort of had the highest cost for drivers, right? And what's interesting to me about that is, there's only a few reliable ways into the trucking industry. And one of those is to hook up with a big carrier who can help you through school and get you your CDL and get you started. So to me, that feels a little entry level. And, to your point, it seems like then that would drive their cost of employment down. But still, they're paying more than every other size. Why do you think that is?
That's a really great question, and the answer is somewhat complex. The first thing I would say is that large carriers come in a couple different styles, right? There are those carriers that are doing, entry level hiring, very low experience required, and we, frankly, as an industry, we rely on that, because if everyone said you need 2 years of good driving experience to drive a truck, nobody would be driving a truck. But we also have large carriers that, that do have that higher safety requirement in terms of years of experience. So that's part of the picture. Part of the picture is also, a lot of drivers will gravitate to smaller companies because they like the fact that the owner knows them on a first name basis, or they like the fact that they have a personal connection with their dispatcher or something like that. Those kinds of personal connections that it's hard to put a price tag on that, but a lot of drivers do like that and are willing to maybe take home less pay on a per mile basis. Especially, if that means a little bit of flexibility. If the folks that are running dispatch or the folks that are, setting up things in the office, you might feel more comfortable saying, hey, I really need this day off in order to get to my son's baseball game or something like that. And again, that's something that we've seen in this industry, especially. There has been a shift towards, if I can get more scheduling on my terms, I'll take it, even if that comes out of a bit of a pay cut. And so a lot of larger fleets are going to be paying more in order to sort of make up for, hey, they're not going to be offering some of that tailored stuff, but they can offer more pay.
Yeah. So you said there's always new data elements, and why make the people wait so long? What are the new data elements, Alex? Why should we be excited about it?
Yeah, one of the things that we've really expanded a lot is something that Drew mentioned earlier, and that is our analysis on revenue and profit margins, and being able to look at how those trends match up historically. So one of the big things last year, for example, people were saying, why are there so many carriers still? Why has capacity not left the market? And any reader of our report knew the answer to that question. It's because look at what the profit margins were still in 2022, even, to say nothing of 2021 and 2020. Any carrier who was paying attention was really making a nice nest egg during that 3-year period of really high average profits. I mean, we had sectors that were averaging double-digit profits in those years. So that's a big reason why, again, for this report being able to show this is why the industry is behaving the way it is. If you expected capacity to leave at the first sign of a down market, you haven't been paying attention to the trends. And that was one of the things actually that we saw this year too. We looked at in 2023 returning fleets. What happened to their fleet sizes? How many trucks were they running? And on average, fleets were actually increasing their fleet sizes by a little over 4%. So again, capacity in 2023, at least, was not leaving the market. It was still a growing market. And that's something that, again, FMCSA numbers are great for a lot of things, but if you're just looking at registrations, that's going to be mostly focused on owner operators, which is every registration is just one truck. But if you can say, look, fleet sizes of 1,000 and more, they were growing by over 4%. Fleet sizes of 100 to 1,000, they were also growing by over 4%. That changes the picture of how the industry is moving, and should really give you pause in terms of thinking about how this current market is playing out.
That's interesting. So you mentioned trends. Are there any other trends you've seen over time that that are worth pointing out?
Yeah. It's funny. We're several years on from the pandemic now, but it continues to impact the cost cycles that we're going through. Insurance is a great example. 2020 happened. All the four-wheelers got off the road, and crash rates improved significantly, right? Because I wasn't texting while drive. I don't text while drive. I want to be clear.
Sure you don't, Alex.
I would never do such a thing, but it improved safety considerably. We know that the majority of crashes involving an 18-wheeler are caused by the passenger vehicles out there. So it was great. It improved performance in the commercial auto sector, which had been sort of struggling for like 10 years. And that resulted in a sort of stabilization in insurance premiums on average, sort of across the industry. And we saw that stabilization play out in 2021 and 2022. And that ended in 2023. So we saw premiums go up by about 12.5%, kind of catching up for that stabilization, which again, in some ways, it marks the end of that immediate post-pandemic period where we saw that benefit of stabilized prices. But in a way, we're still experiencing it because that jump was probably a little higher than what it would have been if we had just been on a standard year-to-year trend. So we're seeing interesting effects like that in a lot of areas. Repair and maintenance costs was one where those costs were sky high in 2021 and 2022 because nobody could get new trucks. So they had to just keep running old trucks and putting extra money into those R&M costs. This year, finally, it came back down and was actually below inflation, which again signals to us that we've actually had the correction play out there, where now the average truck age among fleets is pretty low actually, and so we've kind of, if anything, potentially overcorrected a little bit.
I love that. That's one of my favorite data points, average truck age and life cycle of a truck. And I do want to talk about that, but I don't want to leave insurance yet because we sure got Drew on the line and he could tell us if, that sort of matches what the expectation was from sort of inside the insurance world, those increases.
Yeah, I think it certainly was reflected in data we were representing. I think that, the other curveball you throw into that is the nuclear verdicts. And ultimately, as you know, insurance carriers from a frequency perspective, though they look at that as, those that are having frequency issues, that generally leads to severity issues long term and consider that in the underwriting process. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the dollar amounts that impact what rates you're going to get. And nuclear verdicts continue to go up, and that continues to be an issue. And there's all these historical claims prior to 2020 that are continue to develop and continue to have increased costs associated with them. So I don't think we saw the same relief, even though the frequency went down from a severity perspective, and therefore didn't see the same impact to rates that we would have expected if you purely looked at the frequency of crashes.
Okay, so how is the average age of my truck is about 4 years now, right? Or what was it again? 4.8?
Little below that, actually.
Yeah, it dropped down.
3.8 maybe. But then the average life cycle, am I getting this right, of a truck was somewhere around 15. Does that mean that most of the trucks are young, or how do I square those two numbers together? And again, we'll work, am I smarter than a fifth grader? No. So start there and then talk a little bit about average age of truck versus replacement, life cycle replacement or whatever.
Yeah. So they're complementary metrics in a way. So your average truck age is the average in your fleet. That's going to include the ones that you just bought, as well as the ones that you've had for some time. So your life cycle is the indicator of approximately how long is it before you're turning over. So truck tractors, we had that average trade cycle this year was 7.5 years. And then the average age was 3.8. So again, average age usually should be about half of that cycle. If you see that shift, then that's an indicator that, if the cycle is 7.5 and your truck age is 5, that means folks are struggling to acquire the trucks that they need. And that's what was happening during
That's what we saw pandemic. I got
exactly.
it.
So now we're in somewhat more typical conditions, where that average age is about half of that life cycle. And those trucks get sold, right? So they're getting sold and they enter as used trucks in that market, either in the U.S. or a lot of used trucks will end up down in Mexico as well. Is a huge market for used U.S. trucks. And that's a cost that the thing I always remind people is that is a sticky cost, right? If you buy a truck today, unless you're paying for it all cash up front, which plenty of people do in this industry, you probably have some kind of payment plan. Depending on the size of your fleet, larger fleets will tend to pay more up front, but it depends. There are 1,001 ways to acquire your equipment in this industry. If you bought a truck in late 2022, when prices were through the roof, when availability was low, you may still be paying that bloated monthly payment for years to come, right? You might be on a 4-year term, 5-year term, and that is going to continue showing up in your cost per mile for all of those years going forward. So truck prices have dropped considerably at this point, but a lot of fleets, if they had to make those acquisitions or if they had to sign those leases or whatever it was during that high, that hot truck market, about 2 years ago now, they are continuing to pay the price for that. And a lot of them will continue to pay the price for that.
Unless they go out of business, which a lot of them have, because rates have not kept pace, right?
No. And that is one area where, again, that is one of the most impactful cost decisions, frankly, in this sort of 4-year market trajectory coming out of the pandemic. When and how you acquired your equipment is probably the biggest factor in terms of how are you sitting right now, just because of how big that cost has grown. Yeah.
So it depends on my ability to predict the future. That's my revenue delta.
So much does.
Yikes. That is a scary thought.
No, but I think it's instructive here to make sure that people listening understand that's a really important factor for your business, is how you're financing your equipment. And some things are fungible, but some things aren't. Right?
And it is a trade-off too, right? We often see that truck costs and repair and maintenance costs have a kind of balance to them, right? If you're paying more for your truck, you're getting those brand new trucks right off the assembly. Your repair and maintenance had better be lower. If it isn't, then there are some questions that you need to figure out. It should be much lower. And so there is a trade-off there. So it's not an all or nothing. You're not doomed if you bought that new truck at, November of 22 or something like that. But knowing the relationship between those numbers, how it works in your fleet, what you're prepared to, how your technicians, how your shop is set up to be able to do the maintenance you need based on your acquisition profile. All of those things impact that balance, and ideally it balances out. But again, in a challenging market like this, it's the curveballs that challenge your standard cost operating procedure that can be the most challenging.
And I know you all use the TMC benchmarking data in your analysis, and I know that's something that's talked about a little bit in our industry, but not a lot. But the technician shortage and technician costs have gone up too, because trucks are getting more complicated. So that's something to keep in mind too, right?
Yeah, that TMC report, I can't recommend that enough. We use that, we cite it every year to help corroborate our numbers, and they do what we don't do, which is break it down by parts versus labor to look at that. And certainly, especially, when driver wages are up, you can bet that probably technician wages are up too. It's a similar, those labor pools behave similarly. And so similarly, like driver wages, they're still growing, but not at quite that pace that they were in 2022. we've seen that trend with technicians as well, where still going up generally, but not at quite that breakneck pace that it was for a few years there.
And it's often the large fleet sizes that can withstand the variables of the market, right? And the costs we're talking about. Maybe one thing for us to continue to try and push around, how do we get more participation from those smaller fleets? That was probably one of the more interesting things that stuck out to me, is it was almost an equal blend based on the sample sizes of the fleet sizes that participated in the survey. It was right around 20%, I think, for small fleets, but we know industry, it's about 90% in that small grouping of less than 5 trucks. So any thoughts on kind of the respondent size, and then how do we continue to drive smaller fleets to participate in the surveys?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. I ask myself that every year when we start this data collection. It's, those very small fleets running, 1-2 trucks, they've got their hands full. It's, if they've got the extra time to submit data, that's, they're probably feeling good about themselves because it's busy out there. We try to make it as simple as possible for small fleets, and we tell all participants, hey, submit whatever you can. If you can't finish the whole thing, that's all right. We're going to be debuting next year a streamlined form specifically for owner-operators that cuts out some of the stuff that just isn't relevant to them. So they have a little bit, it's a shorter, more targeted form to make their lives easier. We had a record number of owner-operators this past year, and that even breakdown on fleet sizes is something that we're quite proud of. But really, it's, the customized reports are big, and then trying to really emphasize how much this knowledge can really help you as a small fleet. If you don't know your costs, you don't know the rates that you can accept. And if you don't know what, your costs are compared to your peers, you're going to miss out on the potential for cost savings, really. One of the really interesting things from this year's report is, I think one of the most interesting takeaways was that no parts of the industry experienced the exact same cost pressures, right? We all had pressure, but whether you look at different sectors, fleet sizes, what have you, everyone experienced that pressure in a bit different way. And if you're plugged into that as a fleet, you're going to be better able to anticipate what purchasing decisions you need to make, what decisions you need to make about, hey, where can I rein in on costs a little bit without it negatively impacting my operations. And so again, to navigate a market this challenging, being able to recognize how those pressures are different based on where you are in the market is extremely valuable.
Yeah, and I really appreciate those comments, and I was struck by some of the owner-operator data. So the average owner-operator pay is $2.10 a mile. The marginal cost of everybody surveyed is $2.27 a mile. I presume that owner-operators don't have the same marginal cost pressures, right? Otherwise, they'd be losing, Steve, you're better at math, 17 cents a mile, which is not a very good business model. So any thoughts on what the marginal cost for owner-operators might be? And as we think about ways to incent smaller carriers and owner-operators, is ATRI considering developing a specific marginal cost for those owner-operators or individual motor carriers?
Yeah, so in the report this year, we used a fleet size category of fewer than 5 trucks, which is the closest we can get based on volume of data. We want to make sure that the numbers are robust rather than just going for the category's sake. And so we include that breakdown for all of those cost centers. So certainly that is one area. We did also produce customized reports that were owner-operator specific. Sorry, I don't know if that came through. I had a oversized, overweight truck right outside my window there.
What's his marginal cost?
Revving up to get over the hill there. So it's, one of the big reasons why there's that difference is there's a few different reasons. One of them is that owner-operators, their profit and their wage are going to the same place. And so they don't have that same, they have a little bit of a different, their books look differently in that respect. They also, so as a result, what counts as their wage is going to be different from a driver wage who isn't getting the profit as well. A lot of owner operators also do a lot of their own maintenance. So they're able to cut costs that way. We do see in general, whatever your fleet size is, the more of your own maintenance you do in-house, the lower your repair and maintenance costs are. So there's a few ways like that. And owner operators also are usually able to have lower truck payment costs. Again, unless they enter the market at a bad time, like this most recent hot, truck market, which is kind of the kiss of death for an owner operator. A savvy owner operator is able to operate their equipment for a pretty extended period of time. They're going to be able to get used equipment, know what good deals look like on used equipment. And so we often see them able to keep that cost center down as well. So it really, again, it highlights how important it is for owner operators to be really savvy about the industry, but also how they operate their costs as well.
So there's been a lot of press the last year or two on alternative fuel vehicles, EVs and the like. It's mind blowing. And so I know you guys have done some, as part of this report, you've looked at that issue a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about alternative fuel vehicles and how they might, what's in the report that might be useful for people to know?
Yeah, we've been collecting data on alternative fuel vehicles for some time. And it's the trick about, sorry, I've got an alarm going off over here. The trick about alternative fuel vehicles is they're still very rare. We are not able to give cost metrics on alt fuel vehicles because there aren't enough of them to be able to get the data that we need, unfortunately. And I have to answer emails to that effect on almost a monthly basis, frankly. So, we find that there are, of our respondents, just shy of 13% have at least one alternative fuel vehicle. Most of those fleets are large fleets, though we have seen some fleets with, just 100 to 250 trucks beginning to get, their one alt fuel vehicle. It's, in many cases that might be for a specific customer, right? A specific contract where they have an arrangement with that customer. They know the lane, they know how the operation is going to work. But when we look at, what kinds of alt fuel vehicles, compressed natural gas is by far still the most common alt fuel vehicle. That's not really the one that we're talking about in the conversations. We're talking about battery, hydrogen, renewable diesel. We can't really track renewable diesel because it's drop-in fuel, right? So you can mix that in with petroleum diesel. It's the same truck. So we aren't able to track that, unfortunately. But we see gradually every year that the numbers tick up just a little bit, but it's still pretty low. Something like, I think it's 4.4% of all trucks in our sample use some form of alternative fuel. And again, the vast majority of those are compressed natural gas.
Steve, I have to say I'm disappointed that you missed out on a great joke opportunity to call EVs a hot topic or something like that, considering they keep catching on fire and people aren't able to put them out.
Don't get me. See.
I'll give you a pass for that. Oh, it's about to happen. Everybody, sit down.
Yeah.
For another podcast, perhaps.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we're coming just about up to time here. Alex and Drew, this has been an awesome conversation. This has obviously been a seminal report and something that everybody looks forward to. We, of course, really appreciate your work on it. We encourage everybody listening, if they're not already doing that, to contribute to this, because it's going to help you. It's going to help Drew. It might even help Steve and me to be better at the jobs that we do. So for that, I'll say thank you and offer anybody on the call an opportunity to offer any particular insights or key takeaways or, things that carriers should pay particular attention to in this report or reports in years past. So I guess I'll start with Drew.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing that stuck out for me is safety bonuses increasing above sign-on bonuses for the first time ever. So again, personal in the risk.
Good news for the industry there, eh?
Yeah, love that, eh?
Steve, anything you really liked about the report that you want people to focus in on? Page 47, page 26?
Well, I think, to me, if you're not spending time digesting this, you need to. We spend a lot of time talking about safety and compliance, but a lot of people, I'd say a lot. Some people get into this business not necessarily understanding the full appreciation of what they're getting into. And so for those that are new to the business or relatively new to the business, if you haven't had a chance to review this study, please do so, because it'll really help you be better at what you do. And you're a great driver already, but this will help you be an even better business person. So I strongly encourage you to read it.
And it's free, like all ATRI's reports. It's free. I downloaded 3 copies myself because I kept misplacing them. So,
you know what he does, though? He puts it under his pillow at night. He hopes it goes into his osmosis to his brain.
And clearly that is not working.
Yeah. Well, he's going to wear that shirt, so I don't know what that's all.
Oh, man. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, you better log on, because I got the greatest shirt ever. Log on to YouTube. All right, Alex, why do we need this report? And even better, how do we get in contact with you to participate for next time?
I think we've covered a lot of great reasons why you need it. Another one is that we do try to estimate what's happening next. We do, for each one of these cost centers, try to break down, hey, here's how the trajectory is going. Here's, based on the data that we have now, what we think things are going to do next. And so that's another area where it's not the core focus of the report, but it can be, again, very useful. You can download this and any of our research for free as many times as your heart desires at truckingresearch.org. And you can reach me at aleslie@trucking.org. If you're a fleet considering participating for the first time, I help fleets walk through the process all the time. We sign non-disclosures if that makes you feel better. There's all kinds of ways that we try to make as quick and as useful a process for you as possible. So please do reach out.
Awesome. Will you be at MC&E? Can people corner you there?
Yes, I will. And in fact, we'll have hard copies of the report there. So, corner me, take home some light reading material. Yeah, absolutely. Would love to see anyone there.
Yeah, that's American Trucking Association's Management Conference and Exhibition.
Yeah.
Scheduled for the second week in October.
Yeah, coming up soon already.
Awesome. Well, thanks, gentlemen. As always, great insight. Really appreciate having you guys on. And maybe, Alex, if we get lucky, we'll have you back to talk about detention sometime soon.
It would be my pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks all.
Thanks for listening to this episode of True North Truck Thought. If you enjoyed the topic today and want to tune in for future conversations here on the TTT Pod, make sure to follow us. Also, please don't hesitate to let us know which topics you want us to cover in future episodes. Drop us a line in the comments section or send us an email to transportationnews@truenorthcompanies.com. Thanks and have a safe day.